And Carol, I learned, was the drumbeat, the heart, soul, and hands of Turtle Mountain Community College. It was her ability to tie this college to the land, culture, and language of the Anishinaabe people that built this college and gave it the strength that it has, and that allowed Cardi to do that broader work for all of us collectively. So Carol was an administrator here for many years. She was the vice president of Turtle Mountain Community College. But more than that, Carol is the mother of Turtle Mountain Community College. She founded this college with others. There were other people involved, but Carol really led the founding of this college. And I just think it's amazing that we're in the presence of someone like that. It just gives me goosebumps to know that someone who had the vision and the drive and the commitment to her people to work to create this college when there was nothing. You know, we have it easy now. We think we have it hard, but it's so easy compared to, imagine nothing, no money, no federal program. Even the Tribal College Act didn't exist at that time. The Tribally Controlled College and Community, whatever. That act that provides your operating funding, that didn't exist. Nothing existed. And Carol had this vision because she heard about 5 other tribes who were starting to form their own colleges. And she said, my people need this. And she built this college, she created it, she founded it, and hopefully she'll tell us some of those stories. But it was really her strength that created this college. And then who worked harder than almost anybody else. I mean, it's amazing what she did to help create this college. But she worked like crazy to make it real. And then, as she says, went home and hugged her children tight. So Carol is a true visionary, a dreamer, a creator, and an activist. In addition to founding Turtle Mountain Community College, she worked and then working here for years. She also worked with North Dakota State University and other universities on a number of important STEM programs for our Native youth. And then she also helped found the Tribal Nations Research Group, which is a collective of some of the brightest people here in this community and probably broader now, who do very important research to this community, to their tribe, and to this region. So I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce Carol to you, and I will invite her to come up now and share her wonderful stories.
I want to welcome all of you to Turtle Mountain. We have a beautiful reservation. As you can see, it's small. Our population you'll hear about because you're Native people, but we have our own researcher over yonder. We have about 36,000 enrolled tribal members, and about 18,000 of them live in this county. And so we are rather large tribe in comparison to other tribes. I want to congratulate AIHEC on 50 years. We've had 50 years here at Turtle Mountain, and there was a celebration last year. It was really, really wonderful. So I want to say welcome to you and good morning. I'm humbled to speak in front of all of you. You are a very distinguished group. As you know, tribal colleges are very near and dear to my heart. I want to thank whoever's responsible for inviting me to share my memories and to have input into the future of AIHEC. Congratulations to all of you who are involved with the greatest institutions on the reservations, who are fortunate enough to have a tribal college. Today, after pondering over a topic, I have chosen to speak about the past, the present, and the future of tribal colleges. The past will be primarily the efforts we made here at Turtle Mountain. The present will cover what occurs at tribal colleges, and many of you will be familiar with that part of my presentation. And the future will include advice. Advice as to what I envision for tribal colleges as a tribal elder who resides on an American Indian reservation. As I sat and thought about the past, the words that came to me were seeking the dream. And I think when I tell you about those early years, rather the early days, because it was about a year of intense work, I could see that we were all seeking a vision. I'm a former administrator here at Turtle Mountain Community College, and one of the Turtle Mountain representatives that helped TMCC become one of the 6 original tribal colleges that incorporated the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. For us, the thoughts about a college began primarily in 1971 and resulted in a resolution creating the college in 1972. We were fortunate to find others on reservations who were pursuing the same goal. Later, I will share how we found them. The people I remember from the original founders were Gerald Onefeather and Virgil Kilstraight from Pine Ridge, Lionel Bordeaux and Stanley Redbird from Rosebud, Jack Barton, Gerald White, and Dave Gibb from Standing Rock, Thomas Atsidy from Navajo, Dave Rishling from DQ University in California, and a whole group of people here at Turtle Mountain. There were outsiders like Helen Sherbeck, who is Lumbee Indian, who was working in Washington, D.C. in the Department of Education, as a director of developing institutions. And Pat Locke, Standing Rock and Turtle Mountain. She was enrolled at Standing Rock, but her father was from Turtle Mountain. She was based in Denver and was the director of the Western Indian Civil Association in higher education. Each had a role in the development of the tribal college movement. I share this information because I understand I was invited to share my memories of those early days. I may be the only founder from that group that is still living. We have our original committee here at Turtle Mountain, and many are still living. And it is probably the same at other tribal colleges. Most of us had committees. We didn't do this alone. But there was a core group that was involved in what I will describe as the consortium level. We were working together. This group worked to find a common interest and motivation to establish fully accredited tribal colleges on our reservations. We wanted them to be reservation-based, governed by all Native board members. We wanted to preserve and promote our history, language, and culture. And we're willing to work together to find adequate funding for our dream. I hope to help you understand what happened in those early days of the tribal college movement, when we were beginning the process of pursuing our tribal college. That sounds like a cliche, but that word suits our efforts, a dream. For us, it began when the University of Mary brought me on board as the state talent search director. I believe that I am proof that our reservations lacked professionals who had earned college degrees. I had an Associate of Arts degree, and I was a trained secretary. I could stop there and tell you a little story. I was working on the Standing Rock Reservation, and my boss was Shirley Plume. And I was her secretary. And she called me in one day and she said, Carol, she said, I want to talk to you. And I sat down with her and I got along really well. She said, I don't think you should be a secretary. I looked at her and I thought, oh gosh, what did I do wrong? And she said, I think you should get a college degree. You're too bossy to be a secretary. So I was hired as the state director for talent search. Like I said, I had an associate's degree. Where were the qualified applicants for that position? We hired a counselor at each reservation. Clyde Baker at Fort Berthold, Glenn Eagle at Standing Rock, Gertie Kavanaugh at Spirit Lake, and Sherman Burnell at Turtle Mountain. The first assignment that we had among us was to find the high school graduates and get them into school. As we searched, we continued to meet students who had enrolled in off-reservation colleges, but they seemed to return to the reservations within a month or two. Our students preferred reservation life. Proof was that in 1971, here on the Turtle Mountain Reservation, we had 4 college graduates working, tribal members who were college graduates working, who had bachelor's degrees. I gave you our numbers before on our tribal enrollment. 1971 wasn't that many years ago. We had 4 people with college degrees. We had 1 person with a master's degree. Yet our scholarship program continued to spend thousands of dollars every year funding students with no results. We had a problem, and we were trying to figure out what to do about it. It was at this point that I attended a talent search conference. I don't remember where. And I met Virgil Kilstreet. He was the state talent search director in South Dakota. And I and Virgil had a similar problem. Our students were not experiencing success at state colleges and universities. And yet as talent search directors, our job was to go out and look for students and get them enrolled in college. But we weren't getting any results. At least they were not getting them in the past. As we did our best to come up with a solution, our conversation turned to what Navajo Community College was doing. They had taken the tribal-controlled K-12 education system and expanded the idea into higher education. They had established Navajo Community College on their reservation. One of my favorite stories about the beginning of tribal colleges is about the meeting that Navajo Community College had with their State Board of Higher Education. They were in the process of telling them about their college when the state board members began to raise questions about credits, quality of education, transfer of credits, and those sorts of questions. Frustrated, one of the gentlemen who was representing Navajo Community College, and he was Navajo, made the statement, "We came to tell you what we're doing. We didn't come here to ask your permission." I thought that was pretty cool. Back to my meeting with Virgil. We agreed to get together when we got home to advance the discussion about tribal colleges on our reservation. He invited us to Rapid City, and a group of us from North Dakota Talent Search Program traveled there to meet with Virgil and his representatives. I recall that meeting because several things happened. We met in Virgil's room as we didn't have money to rent a conference room. We pulled the bedspread tight around the bed to make a table, and we put our chairs next to the bed. And some of them were fortunate to have chairs, others knelt during the meeting. And I'll tell you another story. While we were waiting for the delegation from Pine Ridge to arrive, we visited. In the conversation, we talked about our boarding school days. I attended Marty High School, located on the Yankton Reservation in South Dakota. Virgil attended a boarding school on the Pine Ridge Reservation. He asked me about Mush and Donuts Manette. He went on to say they were the fastest runners he had come up against in track meets, and it wasn't until they graduated from Marty that he was able to take first. I remember hearing that same question after a track meet at Marty about 10 years earlier. After the track meet, we had a dance with the athletes from the other schools, and I danced with someone who asked that very same question. Not being bashful, I blurted out, "Virgil, did I dance with you at Marty?" It turns out this was the same Virgil that I had met at a boarding school dance years earlier. Our friendship and trust grew out of that meeting at Rapid City, where we agreed to help one another build our tribal colleges. Should the opportunity arise, and we were going to look for that opportunity. Our work together is documented in Wayne Stein's book, Tribal Colleges, an Underfunded Miracle. It was Virgil who called me to tell me about a meeting taking place in Seattle in 1972. He explained that there was a group meeting there to establish the first tribal colleges. Pine Ridge was being represented by Gerald Onefeather, and the main person there would be Helen Scherbeck, who was coming with a funding opportunity for tribal colleges. Hearing this, I knew we had to attend that meeting. I went to my supervisor at the University of Mary, but because it was not in the budget, my funding request was denied. Desperate, I went to Minot and I bought myself a ticket. My husband was a college student at the time and was unemployed. I decided that I wasn't going to let lack of money stop me. I was being paid once a month, and that month I spent my whole check on a trip to Seattle. I had 4 children at the time. I called the hotel where the meeting was going to be held and reserved a room. I had stayed in a motel before, but I only stayed in a hotel once. A group of us from Turtle Mountain were traveling back to Marty for a Christmas vacation, and we got caught in a snowstorm. We were in Aberdeen, South Dakota. We stayed in this old hotel, and it had a bathroom at the end of the hall that we all shared. So when I was visiting the clerk in the hotel at Seattle, before I hung up, I said, "Sir, I have a request." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Could I have a room that has a private bathroom?" His answer was, "Ma'am, all our rooms have private bathrooms." Needless to say, it was a pretty nice hotel, and yes, I had a private bathroom. I arrived in Seattle. I found the hotel and found the people I was trying to meet with. I was there 3 days, and I didn't get invited to the meeting. In fact, On the morning I was supposed to leave to go back to North Dakota, I should say come back to North Dakota, I got up and I fell on my knees. I needed divine intervention. I had not had any success getting invited to the meeting. I went to breakfast and Pat Locke, who knew me and my purpose in Seattle, asked if I had attended the meeting with Helen Scherbeck that morning. I told her I had not been aware. And she saw one of the representatives come into the restaurant and she pointed him out to me. It was Gerald One-Feather. I called out his name and he came over. We discussed Turtle Mountain's interest. He told me we were not forgotten when they met. They decided that Turtle Mountain and Standing Rock would each receive a planning grant. I assured him that our plans were in place and we were ready for implementation. We didn't want to spend a year planning for what we had already done. He must have seen my determination. He gave in by saying, "Is your proposal ready?" I assured him I was ready to go, and his response was, "Fine, show up in Phoenix in 2 weeks and you're in." For a minute I was elated. We were successful. We would attend the Phoenix meeting and we would get funding for our college. It didn't take long before elation turned to anxiety. I had never written a proposal. And now I told a lie and said it was written. In that moment, I promised myself that we would write something and we would show up in Phoenix. I wasn't sure what we would write, but we would be there. Back in the day, you didn't get an assigned seat on a plane. That's how old I am. You got in line and you hoped to get a seat. After the meeting, I went to the airport and I was standing in line with a lot of other Indian educators who had been at the meeting. I think that was one of the first meetings of the, I think it's the National Indian Education Association. I think it was one of their first meetings, and all those educators were there. We had been together at the conference, and I knew some of them. Some of them had been in Student Support Services and Talent Search, and I was aware of who they were. When it was my turn, I was standing at the door. The stewardess stopped me, and she told me the plane was full. I begged her to let me on. I told her I had 4 children at home, and I had to get on the plane. I wouldn't move, I just stood there. I stayed first in line, and suddenly she came back and she told me I had a seat. It wasn't first class. I sure felt special. When she came to ask me if she could get me something, I didn't realize that they really took good care of the first class. I said, "Yes, I need a pencil and paper." She had no paper, but she brought me a pile of napkins and a pen. As soon as things settled down, I began to write the proposal. Not knowing how to write it, I put myself in a stranger's shoes. Who were we? What did we want? Where is this place? And so it was like who, what, when, where, why, how. And of course, our money needs. And this became the frame of the proposal. I started with who we were and described our tribe. One thing about the proposal that I remember is that I told another lie. When I was writing this, I thought, boy, I must have been a liar in those days. I knew I had to show proof that we had a need, and I knew we had a need. So I wrote that we had done a survey that showed 90 people would enroll in the college if it became a reality. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll add that the results are in the tribal office, because I knew how chaotic the tribal office was. And they'd search a long time to find any results. When I got off the plane in Minot, I had finished the first draft of the proposal. In a few days, It was done to the best of my ability, and our committee agreed it was correct. I didn't have any money to travel, but we had 2 committee members who were able to find travel money to take the proposal to Phoenix. One was Elma Wilkie, who later earned a college degree at the University of North Dakota, and she became a staff member here at Turtle Mountain Community College. The other was Wayne Kaplan, who was the adult education coordinator for the tribe. The next 2 weeks were the busiest of my life. We needed a tribal resolution creating the tribal college, and we were able to get on the tribal council agenda to acquire that resolution. One other thing we had to do by the time we went to Phoenix was to find a college that was willing to let us use their accreditation for our courses. That was one of the criteria that they set forth in the proposal process that they were going to accept, that we had to have an accredited college that would accept our credits. We were fortunate that the North Dakota State Board of Higher Education was meeting, and I and my husband attended the meeting in Minot. It was, this whole meeting to me was very difficult. They put us last on the agenda, and we met with them at midnight. When we got there, their first offer was for us to wait for them in the lounge and to have a drink if we felt like having one while we waited. We said no, thank you, that we would wait outside the meeting room and sit in the chairs until we were invited into the meeting. When we were finally called in, the first thing they did was to ask us if we would be interested in taking over one of the existing state colleges. We said no, because we wanted all of our students to have access, not just those who could afford to leave the reservation, and we expected our college to be involved here on the reservation. Years later, I was invited to speak to the North Dakota State Board of Higher Education to talk about our college. And I told them I had made a huge mistake when I had met with them years before. I should have taken them up on their offer to take over a state college campus. We could have sold it and used the money to support our tribal college. I'm not sure if they liked that response, but that's what I told them. After some discussion, the board assigned, back to our meeting in Minot. After some discussion, the board assigned our college to the School of Forestry at Botno. It was then the School of Forestry. It was affiliated with the State Land Grant College, North Dakota State University, located in Fargo. The Botno College is now Dakota College in Botno, independent and located 30 miles from our reservation. After the go-ahead from the North Dakota State Board of Higher Education to work with the college at Botno, time was running out. So we took our proposal to the CEO at Botno. I think he wasn't a president or vice president. I remember him being called dean. We asked him to sign our proposal, and he refused. He said he didn't have permission to sign proposals, only to work with us to accredit courses. And this was 2 days before Elma and Wayne were scheduled to leave for Phoenix. I made up my mind I was not going to give up. I got up very early the next morning, got into my old Buick, and I set out for NDSU, which was 275 miles away. I intended to ask the president to sign that proposal. I later found out that was pretty naive. I couldn't just walk in a president's office and ask for a signature. Good thing I didn't know that. I might not have gone. When the president wouldn't meet with me, I remembered a man by the name of Bob Sullivan, who was a staff member at NDSU. I found him and I asked for his help. He looked at my proposal and said, "Nobody's going to fund this." And he put marks all over the page. I grabbed my proposal and I told him that it had to be on its way to Phoenix the next day, and I would have Now I would have to retype that page when I got home, and that was going to be later that night. I was at a loss as to what to do, so I asked Mr. Sullivan if I could use his phone, and I called Elma Wilkie. She said she would call me back with instructions for what to do, and I waited. When she called back, she had made me an appointment with Art Raymond. He was a Native man who was in the North Dakota State Legislature. He worked at the University of North Dakota, which was 75 miles away. I had to be there by 5 o'clock. I met with Mr. Raymond, and he made a phone call to the chairman of the State Board of Higher Ed, who was Mr. Davidson. He said he would do what he could and would call Mr. Raymond back. He did call back and told us the dean at Botano would sign our proposal. He let me call Elma, and he assured me that she and Wayne would meet me in Botano at 8 in the morning. By this time, it was 7 o'clock at night, and I had 3 or 4 hour drive ahead of me. When I got home, I still had to retype and rewrote the first page of my proposal. Then I went to bed. It had been quite a day. Little did I know that this was only part of the excitement. The next day was just as filled with twists and turns. The weather was raining. Thank you. The weather was raining, and it was cold as I prepared to travel to Botano. I had no babysitter, so I loaded 3 of my 4 children, my oldest was in school, in my car, and I took off with the proposal to Botano, where we met with the dean. He gave us a little preaching, and he signed the proposal. Elma and Wayne took the proposal and set out for Minot. I stayed back a few minutes to thank him for signing the proposal and to kind of mend our fences, I guess. But to my terror, the signed cover was still on his desk. Elma and Wayne left without the signature page. I grabbed the paper and I ran out the door to my kids who were waiting in the car. I had $10 to my name. I stopped at the gas station, I put in the gas, warned my kids we had no food, no money for food. By this time, the weather had turned to rain and snow. The roads were horrible, but I had to get to Minot before Elma and Wayne got on the road. Told my children to lay down on the seats and to hang on. We charged on the icy road to Minot faster than was safe. I got to the airport, stopped in front of the door, and I ran in, and there they were sitting at seats, waiting to board. I was lucky. The ice caused the flight to be delayed. They took the signature page. I wished them safe travels. I went back to my car, put my hands on the steering wheel, and cried. I said, holy mackerel, 2 weeks and the race is over, and the proposal was on its way. Upon Elma and Wayne's return, they related the UWP ceremony conducted by Stanley Redbird from Rosebud, where the tribal colleges were united in their commitment to advance the needs of their tribal citizens and promote their history, language, culture. I always reminded our staff and the tribal colleges that the tribal colleges were founded in ceremony, as Carrie had said earlier. And they must always respect the college as a sacred institution. And I share that with you because you are now at tribal colleges. They're not just a college, they're not a state college. They're a college that was founded in a ceremony by our people. In that ceremony, we made commitments that we would serve our people through these institutions. We were not to fight or show disrespect to our colleges. We had a responsibility to support them and to take care of these sacred institutions. And I share that with all of you because your institution is more than a college. It is a sacred institution. And when you hear people that are disgruntled, and we all hear that once in a while, you need to remember that. Remind them that these are sacred institutions. And if it continues, don't participate. Once our proposals were on their way to DC, the 6 tribal colleges began to work together. Pat Locke was willing to host us in Denver, and we met mostly at her home to plan the next steps we had to take in order to become viable institutions of higher education. At this point, I remember feeling like we're so far, and it had been less than a year that the struggle had taken place as a group, but we had come this far that we were now pretty much assured, well, we were assured that we would be funded. Helen Scherbeck was moving that forward. One of the amazing things about the tribal colleges was the ages of many of those who became leaders in that phase. I always said we were a bunch of 25-year-olds, and we were taking on this enormous challenge. We did have seasoned educators involved with us, which was fortunate. But those who were willing to take on the biggest challenges were the younger leaders. We were thirsty. We didn't care. We said what we thought, and we knew what we were fighting for. We wrote proposals together way in the night. We got up early in the morning, and we did it all over again. None of us had money, so we found the cheapest meals, and lots of Ring of Red was on the menu. Some I remember from those early days, in those early meetings, were Lionel Bordeaux, Dave Gibb, Glenn Eagle, Jack Barton, Dave Rishling, Tom Atzedy, Gerald Winfiddler, and Virgil Killstreet. There were others, but in my memory, they were the main movers and shakers that I remember. Here at Turtle Mountain, we had about a dozen active members who were mostly younger than I was. We worked together to help create Turtle Mountain Community College. The early meetings were not all roses. One of our first meetings found us in a deep divide when a group of prominent Native educators from the outside proposed themselves to take on the role AIHEC has today. Their pitch was that they had experience working with senators and congressmen and tribes across the United States, which they did. They had a lot of experience. Another prominent educator proposed that their organization travel to the 6 reservations to educate our tribal governments about higher education. Some of the members appeared to yield to the pressure, and some of them were connected to these educators, to this group that wanted to take over the tribal colleges. But some of us had something different in mind. We envisioned that we would have a board made up of our presidents and a staff that answered to the presidents. We were sued, but we didn't yield. And as a result, AIHEC was born, and it exists today, much as we envisioned it in the very beginning. I think about those early meetings, and I remember the difficulty we were having because the language was so new to us. Accreditation. I never paid attention to accreditation. I had gone to college for 2 years to become a secretary. I had followed a program of study, but I didn't know what it was called. And when they were talking about programs of study and accreditation, it was like, what are they and how does it apply to us? We had to learn all that because the insides of a college were new to us. We spent time learning about higher education through the experiences of one or more participants. That I guess that ignorance changed, but not until I learned the meaning behind the words accreditation, programs of study. And all of a sudden, those words were rolling off our tongues like we really knew what they were. We still hadn't experienced them, but at least we understood their importance. And I also remember Lionel Bordeaux's dream. And this was to have AIHEC establish its own accrediting agency. And it's still a beautiful thought when you think about it. You know, if we someday have the credibility to run our own accrediting agency, not answering to, like Turtle Mountain Community College answers to the Higher Learning Commission out of Washington, out of Chicago. But if we someday were affluent enough where we could actually accredit our own colleges using our own standards, it's an exciting thought. And if this happens, and it won't happen in my lifetime, but in yours it might, I would strongly encourage you to let that organization, to let that accrediting agency carry Lionel's name. Because Lionel was so passionate. A couple years ago I visited with him, he was still talking about why are we answering to these outside agencies, why aren't we creating our own? So I plant that seed with you. Challenge you someday when you think the time is right. Some of you are young enough to move that idea forward. But I know the accrediting process and today is not the day, but it will come, just like other things happen for us. The success of the tribal college movement is evident in the 38 tribal colleges. Look at the numbers of college graduates on those reservations. Turtle Mountain has schools filled with teachers who are enrolled members. The hospital, which had a terrible shortage of nurses, is filled with nurses who are enrolled members. Going back to the school system, if you go into our schools here on the reservation, it's difficult to find a non-native teacher. We have that many teachers in our elementary school. We're still pretty much 50-50 in the high schools, but that's a result of the tribal colleges. Remember, in 1971 and 72, Turtle Mountain had 4 college graduates working here from our tribe, and today we have thousands. We also have 3 medical doctors who are tribal members that are working in our hospital. We probably have 25 medical doctors out in the world, but 3 of them are here. The BIA Social Services is staffed by social workers with college degrees. I know the ladies, they were graduates of Turtle Mountain Community College. We have Ojibwe language graduates who are teaching in our schools. There is a bachelor's degree in Ojibwe language here at this college. Our schools have history majors teaching tribal history and culture. We have engineers, medical doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, entrepreneurs, and many more educated citizens who have some connection to the tribe. One program we have has produced an engineer who holds a PhD from Texas A&M and is working in the engineering program here at the college. Carrie mentioned our relationship to North Dakota State University. The engineering college there accepted our request. It's over probably about 20 years ago. We were looking for opportunities to start recruiting students into the STEM fields. And we said, we thought that if we could partner with a university that had a strong science interest in helping us, science department that was interested in helping us at tribal colleges, that we probably could do this. I was fortunate to meet Dr. Padmanabhan, and in Rapid City at a AMPS meeting. And on the last day they put, it was a huge meeting called by Salish Kootenai. And the last day they put us together by state. And I introduced myself as from Turtle Mountain Community College. The gentleman next to me introduced himself as the chair of the College of Engineering at NDSU. And I told him, I said, my son is an engineering student at NDSU. Oh, really? He said. I said, yeah, it's a big department. I wouldn't expect you to know him, but I said, he's in civil engineering. He said, what's his name? I said, Danny Davis. He looked at me and he said, I'm his advisor. So I had met my son's advisor, but more than that, I had met a person who was thoroughly interested in helping the tribal colleges in North Dakota. And out of that, we developed a program called Nature that is still in existence today. And this young man I described, who earned his PhD from Texas A&M, was one of those high school students that came into the program. At the time we started that program, we had 31 students out of about 500 or 600 students on campus. We had about 31 students who had declared science, associative science major. 5 years later, when the program was being rewritten, we had 187 students who declared associative science as a major. We had impacted our students' interest at the high school level, and when they came into the college, they were enrolling in associative science. For the first time, we had an increased number of students. Today, we have many engineers. One day, I don't remember what I was doing, but I contacted Scott Hansen and I asked him, do you have a picture of a couple of engineering students? I needed it. I was making a presentation somewhere. He sent me a picture of 6 engineers that had been together at a EPSCOR meeting. And I thought that was pretty remarkable, but that was just the ones that had been in the room. There were many other engineers that came out of that EPSCOR program, nature program. Our colleges across the country have revitalized the history, language, and culture of our tribes. Thanks to the collaborations and models established by the tribal colleges and AIHEC. Those models are really important. You know, I've heard about this collaboration amongst you as a group. Keep that strong, because boy, you can learn a lot from one another. We used to call it stealing from one another, but you guys are calling it collaboration. That's good. And I think it should really continue. These efforts coincide with the mission established by the first tribal colleges over concerns that our students needed to acquire knowledge of our history, language, treaties, culture, and information that was critical to each individual college. Our culture was evident in many of the courses we offered when I was at TMCC. Sometimes we learned in ways that could not be explained. I remember the time when I had a dream. And I saw green snow. On the snow were bones, and they were all around a building that was being used as a classroom. In my dream, a man approached me from behind and he said, "We must put tobacco here." I saw bear claw bones hanging from a tree and a red bone in front of the door. The next day when I went to work, I visited with 2 staff members who were knowledgeable of our traditions. One was Dave Ripley, the other was Dennis Bercier. They suggested I call the instructor that was holding class there. We all went to my office and we asked him to come over. As I began to describe my dream, his eyes widened and he sat down in the chair next to my desk. Then he said, "You dreamed about my final exam. placed various bones of a variety of animals around the building on the snow. The snow was green because he had his students seek the bones at night, and he gave them flashlights, and they covered them with green cellophane. The red bone were beaver teeth, and he did have them placed in front of the door, and there was a bear claw hanging in a tree. When he got done explaining what I had seen in my dream, we knew we had to follow the message. We got into the car and we drove to the building where my dream told us to put tobacco. It must have been 20 below. And there we were putting tobacco with Dave, Dennis, and Jeff singing and praying. That is how one of our teachings was relayed to us through one of our instructors. And I'm sure that Jeff didn't forget to put tobacco if he used that same final exam after that. Accreditation is still a necessary process. The tribal colleges go through site visits every 5, 10, or more years. There are still the criteria that springs follow-up visits, reports, and other such matters that cause improvements throughout the tribal colleges under review. Once when we were getting ready for a site visit by the Higher Learning Commission, we took a look at recommendations made by our over the years, and we found that Turtle Mountain Community College was given great advice most of the time, and we could see a pattern that helped us reach new levels as recommendations were applied. We recognized the accreditation process was serious business, and we paid close attention to the details of the process. And I shared that with you because you could look at accreditation visits and reports in two ways. They don't understand us. They don't know who we are as tribes. So they just say what they think they should say and they leave and they never come back. Or you can look at them and take a serious look at what they're telling you and apply those recommendations to your institution. You'll find, like we found, and it was a really interesting meeting. We were getting ready for accreditation, and we said, let's look at the past reports. Let's see what they were telling us. And we could just see the pattern. I don't remember the details, but we said, look, we did this, and then this happened. We did this, and that happened. So we paid attention to those recommendations. One accreditation issue that seems to spring up once in a while is the relationship between the tribal college and tribal government. It is a balance that the tribal colleges will continue to have. We are tribal institutions. And somehow we must learn to exist in that dance. Once in a while you find a tribe that wants to take over because they see you've got resources. It happened to us while I was here. The tribal council wanted to tap into our 401k and other programs, our other, I guess what you would call our fringe benefit package. And we had to hold them off and play a little politics on our own, which is necessary. You know, if you're in a political situation, you have to play politics. And we did. And we were able to hold them off. But tribal councils do have the last say. They can abolish a college with a resolution. And we know that. But you have to make yourself so important and so relevant that they wouldn't dare do it. Turtle Mountain Community College, if a tribal council here tried to abolish this college, they would be removed by the people in about 4 or 5 days. So that's how relevant you want to be on your reservations. I have also seen tribal councils call upon tribal colleges to carry out functions, and that's the way we should be. If a tribal council needs us, we should be ready to respond. We have experts on our staffs at these tribal colleges. If you look at the tribal staff, a lot of times they don't have the same level of expertise that you have as tribal college staff. And so you're called upon, or you should be called upon, to assist. I recall when the tribal government brought Cardi, our president, in to help with the Indian Health Service long-range plan. Some of you will remember Cardi. He was president of Turtle Mountain Community College for almost 40 years and is responsible for this beautiful college campus. I was teaching at the middle school at the time and was appointed to one of the 10 committees. Years later, we received a report that every item on the plan had been achieved. I thought that was really significant. I recall one addressed the rural water system. We didn't have rural water at that time. We had individual wells, and they tapped into our aquifer, and they brought rural water to most of the reservation. It took a long time to get those pipes rolled around, but today most of our people are connected in some capacity to rural water. Another was seeking funding for a new hospital, and we have a real nice hospital. I don't remember the other ones, but there were about 10 items on that. Funding over the years kept our president very busy, and I'm sure it is still that way today. And sometimes staff can say, why is he traveling again? Where is he going? But in the end, you see the results. When the money comes in, when programs come in, that's what your presidents are doing. And your responsibility is to help keep that college going. The major funding legislation and opportunities helped immensely. One important strategy was how we built relationships with program officers and staff at these funding agencies. Our president, Cardi Manette, was a master. He told us who was important and how to respond to them. We didn't invite people to our campus without holding an administrative council meeting. And I know sometimes you think those things are boring, but I remember he would say, so-and-so is going to be here, write that name down. So we'd write the name down. Wanted to make sure we knew who we were talking to. And he would tell us what that person was doing. And he would say, this is how you respond to that person if you're able to address them. And he would take us by department. This is what you can do in that department, that department. I mean, it was a learning process for us, but also a way for us to understand the important role that he had as the leader of his college. And so we did our best to do as we were told. And these are the results we got. I remember one time he went for funding to a private foundation, and he had a proposal, and he asked for $250,000, and it was to add this part of the building. This was the newer part of the building than the other part. And he was asking for $250,000, and he made his pitch. And when he got done, the director of that foundation stood up and said, "Are you sure you only need $250,000?" And I think they gave him $1 million. But when they built this, it was built totally, it was totally paid for. There was no loan or anything involved. By the time he got done going out and finding resources, it was fully paid. That's what Cardi was able to do. That's the kind of leaders we want in our tribal colleges. Tribal colleges are still using the criteria established in 1978 for distribution of funds for students through the Indian Community College Act. There's still a process for counting students and getting funded for each full-time student. The funds are distributed based on full-time equivalents at each college. This sometimes puts tribal colleges against one another when colleges go to conferences and they enroll participants. Another funding issue I see is how tribal colleges compete for the same funds in programs funded by the federal government or private sources. It's too bad we can't find a way to disperse funds in a process that doesn't put tribal colleges against one another. I don't know the solution to that, but I just know that it was difficult to always seem to have to compete against one another rather than collaborate. And it's probably one of those things that will continue for a while as well. Now I want to spend a few minutes talking about the future. While it's great that there are 38 tribal colleges, we must understand that there are many reservations that don't have colleges, and those tribal citizens lack the opportunity that is afforded to these 38 tribal college sites. With the new affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court a few weeks ago, this is another setback for these reservations. Remember, Congress is governed by a lot of millionaires who don't feel too good about brown-skinned people right now, and I think we're aware of that. I think of this as a call to action for the tribal colleges. We need to take a different frame of mind too. We can't always be responding the way the Supreme Court or the way Congress wants us to respond. We're Native people. Has anyone challenged how this law applies to sovereign nations? We're not considered a race. We're a political group. Any race-based decisions should not impact us in the same way it impacts other minorities. That's important. We need to remember to think as Native people. With all the technology out there, is it possible to do more for those reservations who don't have colleges? I believe St. Aglushka still assists the Yankton Reservation in South Dakota. Pine Ridge and United Tribes both served Rapid City at one time because they have a large Native population there. But I'm not sure if that's still happening. It is difficult to count the Indian Community College Act to meet the needs of the reservations without tribal colleges. Is it time to figure out how to meet those needs? I know that it isn't easy for a new tribal college to start up. And I think sometimes we need to remember that sometimes the oppressed become the oppressors. We need to remember that we have a certain amount of responsibility to one another, not only as tribal colleges who are among the 38, but amongst all Native people. When you get a request from another tribe to assist them in development, don't hesitate. This is not something one college can do alone. When I look at the struggle we had to establish our colleges and to get them accredited, I look at those struggles as a learning opportunity. What did we do, and how has those early efforts gotten us to where we are today? We also need to figure out how to increase the number of tribal colleges. We need to stop worrying about the Tribal Community College Act funding as our funding source. We need to accept new tribal colleges when they're ready. We need to provide technical assistance to those reservations who want to create tribal colleges. Remember, we are brothers and sisters and we're all in this together. How are tribal colleges facing the future? Are we stuck in the same rut and feel content that we are accredited without a challenge to our existence? Maybe it is time to take a good look at what we are doing on our reservations. 50 years ago, we saw the lack of educated citizens to occupy key positions on our reservation as a motivator. The lack of opportunity on our reservations was one of the driving forces of the tribal college movement. We had no teachers, nurses, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, social workers, and other professionals from our tribes working on our reservations. I'm sure all 38 tribal colleges have impacted many of those areas. If you are training people to fill the positions that now are served by your graduates, where will the next graduates find work? I said a few minutes ago that if you went into our elementary school, it's difficult to find a non-native teacher. But those teachers are going to be there a long time. There are tribal members, many of them are young. So what are we doing now? Are those qualified citizens having to leave the reservation to work? If so, are we satisfied that we're training our citizens to work elsewhere, using the skills that we've given them? And let some other communities share that knowledge. Most of us live among some of the poorest people in the United States. This is not a problem for the Tribal Council to solve. Tribal colleges should take on the challenge of educating the first-generation college students in our tribes. What would happen if the poorest people on our reservations got priority for funding? Would it impact the families and help bring them out of poverty? Are we going to continue to recycle the same families over and over, where we have 4 generations of bachelor's degrees in one family and still have no degrees in another? We've all got those people on our reservations. Maybe it's time for tribal colleges to become more involved in their communities. Study our issues, collect our data, encourage research, you're all researchers, and include results in our databases, make decisions based on those studies. Carrie mentioned that here at Turtle Mountain, we established a Tribal Nations Research Group that looks after tribal data and takes charge of all research done on the reservation. Again, this happened about almost 10 years ago now. I think it's 8 years. But Cardi was at the University of North Dakota with Paula Warren Carter, and they were at a presentation in the law school where a law professor had done some research on our casino. And they didn't go together, but they got there and they sat together. And while they were listening to these results, they said, we could be doing this for ourselves. Why are we still depending on universities to do our research? And what happens to that research? Is anyone going to know about it? And so they called me, and I remember where, I think I was working at NDSU then. They called me and they said, what do you think? And I said, let's do it. So one thing that we did was one thing we did at Turtle Mountain was to establish the Tribal Nations Research Group. And you researchers might be interested in this, because to be in the jobs you're in, you're interested in data, you're interested in research. We wanted to create a group that looked after tribal data and took charge of all research done on the reservation. Anyone that does research on Turtle Mountain Reservation is made aware that their research results will become the property of our tribe. Any research done on the reservation goes through the tribal IRB. Right now there's about 50 research projects being conducted by students, by researchers, But the process that they go through is when someone wants to do research on a reservation, and we encourage research, they go through the tribal IRB, and once they go through the tribal IRB and they've met that criteria, Tribal Nations Research Group takes that information to the Tribal Council, and the Tribal Council passes a resolution because it's being recommended by the Tribal Nations Research Group, who has used, in our IRB, that's another interesting thing, the Institutional Review Board at Turtle Mountain is made up of all PhDs except for the cultural leader, who is included on the board, and they're all tribal members. Once the research proposal is approved, then it goes to the tribal council, and the tribal council grants them permission to go forward with the study, and the researcher is informed that when the study is complete, the tribe owns that research and owns that result. When it's complete, the study goes back to the research goes back to the IRB to make sure that there's no derogatory statements about our tribe and so forth, but mainly to capture the results of the research. And then it's turned back to the Tribal Nations Research Group, and they produce, I guess, just an abstract of that research, and they have the data. They maintain the data. And again, the purpose behind the Tribal Nations Research Group is to conduct research, to take that research, put it in a database, and then make decisions off of that research that's been done here on the reservation. There's a lot of data now in the database, and there'll still be more when the 50 research projects are done, but there's always, I'd say every month there's 2 or 3, sometimes as many as 7 research proposals that are reviewed by the IRB. So we're getting a lot of data in the database. Once in a while, they contract with the Tribal Nations Research Group to do studies for the tribe. We did a health survey about 3 years ago for the tribe, and that data is all in the database, and people are using it in their programs now. So this is very important for those of you who are involved in research to maintain that data and database, and to start making decisions off of the data, off of the findings. The data resulting from the research becomes the property of the tribe, and that, I can't emphasize that enough. If someone comes on your reservation to do research, that research should belong to your tribe, because they're writing about you, and you'll be able to use it. You don't discourage research. You encourage it, control it, and own it. Tribal Nations Research Group has a president, Anita Frederick, and it's more than just the research department. When Anita Frederick took charge of the organization of the Tribal Nations Research Group, we had found her a $43,000 grant. Today, it's a $1 million operation. She's been fortunate enough to be able to go out and find additional funding. You'd be surprised how many organizations and how many private foundations are interested in what she's doing, and each of you can do this on your reservation. She has been more than willing. She's worked with tribes to help create the IRBs, to help them create the research codes. If you go on the Tribal Nations Research Group website, you can find the tribal code that was adopted, and it's all the rules and regulations that's used. and pertains to any research done on the reservation. I encourage you to write that down, Tribal Nations Research Group, and to look at that site. Carrie mentioned that we have a variety of educators who are involved, professionals that are involved. There's a section in the Tribal Nations Research Code that we encourage associate members. So we have people all across the country who are professionals, and they become members of the organization as associate members. I know we have a professor at UCLA, he's a member. We've got people, engineers, we've got doctors, and just all kinds of people that are there, and we call upon these people to help us. We use their name when we're writing proposals. We use their expertise at our annual conference. Every year there's a conference here put on by Tribal Nations Research Group, and they bring in the researchers who have been doing research and completed research the past year, and they bring those people in and they share the research that they've done. It's all about us, so it's always interesting to see what the professionals have found out about us. Anita works very close with our tribal government, and they call upon her to assist them with many issues. Turtle Mountain Community College is training researchers, but we need more tribal college students to be involved in order for these students to be trained to take on the research required for many of our issues. In other words, this should be the training ground. The tribal colleges that you're in should be the training ground for the researchers that your tribes need to study what's happening in your communities. Tribal colleges should not function as little silos. You can't function in a community college if you're sitting here content and not reaching into that community. You are members of those tribes. You have responsibility within those tribes to do the very best you can to help elevate all the people. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get out of our silos, get into the community, and assist where we're needed. Remember, I said earlier, our colleges are filled with expertise. You guys are the experts, and you work with a lot of other experts, and those experts should be involved with the community. One thing I want to caution you about is getting comfortable and creating those silos. If you create a silo, your presidents also need to be careful, because they see you as their staff members. They have to see the responsibility that the tribal colleges have to the reservations. Sometimes they encourage silos. They want you to do the very best job that you can do right within your departments. But how can you do that if you are a silo and you're not reaching out into the community? Your faculty should be engaging your students in initiatives that help the students to think about their future on the reservations and to help address the issues that have the potential to improve these lives. Your students, the Higher Learning Commission has made requirements that students participate in community service. Many of them address problems such as diabetes. But they should also be creating opportunities for them to look at things that are going to look at the future. Get them on committees, get them on boards, and let them see what's happening on the reservation so that they, when they graduate, can become contributing citizens. Economic development, we need to figure out how to stimulate the economy on our reservation. You have business departments. You got to teach those students more than how to type. You got to do other things with them and make them and get them involved in the communities and let them see the problem firsthand, and then let them try to help resolve it. What are our tribal constitutions telling us about economic development? If we have problems with those constitutions, we need to figure out how to address it. All of this, our graduates shouldn't be waiting for the jobs that were a result of the founding 50 years ago. If we've met our goal and continue to train people for other places, we're not helping our tribes anymore. When the 6 original tribal colleges sat and planned for the future of our colleges 50 years ago, we had very few educated people on our reservation. Now we fill those jobs. We discussed and planned about that first year. We'll continue to have people, but they shouldn't all be teachers now. They shouldn't all be one thing. We need to figure out how to address our communities. Planning for the next 50 years should spend time seeking ways to impact poverty and other issues that arise within our tribes. I've given you a walk down memory lane by sharing the early development of our tribal college and the tribal college movement as I witnessed it on the Turtle Mountain Reservation. It was similar in the early days of the college movement as new colleges struggled to create their institutions of higher ed. We took a brief look at the present and concluded with recommendations you may find useful as you plan for the next 50 years. Thank you. We wish.